It was a severe untreated infection that had spread into my bloodstream, the kind that turns fatal within hours if nobody notices, if nobody cares enough to notice. My mother's response, when she finally showed up at the hospital, was to ask if I'd told the doctors the whole story, worried, I realized later, not about my health, but about how it would make her look. Bailey's exact words were, "You always know how to make an entrance, don't you?" Not one of them asked how I felt. Not one of them asked what the doctor had said. They asked when I'd be discharged, like my recovery was an inconvenience on their schedule. I looked at my own sister, tubes still taped to my arm, and I felt something inside me go completely, permanently still. That stillness is where the second part of this story begins. While I was recovering, a woman named Patricia Coyle called my hospital room. She introduced herself as my grandfather's attorney, the one who had handled his estate 2 years earlier. She said there was something she needed to discuss with me in person, something that had been sitting, quietly, waiting, since before he passed. I asked her to just tell me over the phone. She said, "Emma, this isn't the kind of news you should hear alone in a hospital bed. But I also don't think it can wait much longer." 2 days after I was discharged, I sat across from her in a small office that smelled like coffee and old paper. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a document my grandfather had filed 18 months before he died, quietly, without telling a single member of our family. It was called the Whitfield Family Trust, and it named exactly one beneficiary. Me. Not Bailey. Not my parents. Me. The lake house, the surrounding acreage, and every account tied to my grandfather's name had been placed into that trust the year before he passed, with instructions that it only be revealed once I turned 26 or upon his death, whichever came later. Patricia explained that my grandfather had watched, quietly, for years, the way my family treated me. He'd written a letter, sealed, meant only for me, and asked her to hold it until this exact moment. I opened it in her office with shaking hands. "Emma," it read, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means you're finally old enough that no one can talk you out of what's yours. I watched them push you to the side for years, and I couldn't fix that while I was alive without breaking this family apart. So I'm doing it now, the only way I know how. The house is yours. The land is yours. Don't let guilt talk you into giving it back." I sat in that office and cried for the first time in longer than I could remember. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time in 26 years, someone had seen me, and had done something about it. Patricia told me the paperwork had already cleared probate quietly the year before, while everyone assumed the house had gone to Bailey the same way everything else always did. Nobody had ever bothered to check the actual deed. I decided not to say a word. Not yet. I let 3 weeks pass. I let my body heal. And then I drove back up to the lake house alone, let myself in with the spare key my grandfather had given me when I was 12, and sat at the kitchen table with a folder of my own. 2 days later, my family arrived for what they thought was a normal weekend visit, the kind they'd been taking for granted for years. I was sitting on the porch when their car pulled up the gravel driveway, the same porch where I'd shivered under a blanket while they called me dramatic. My mother got out first, laughing at something Bailey said, until she saw me sitting there, calm, arms crossed, an envelope resting on the small table beside me. "Emma," she said, forcing a smile, "we didn't know you were coming up." "I didn't come up," I said. "I never left." My father frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I slid the envelope across the table toward them. Inside was a copy of the deed, the trust documents, and a 30-day notice to vacate, effective immediately, on any future use of the property. Bailey snatched it first, her eyes moving fast across the page, her face draining of color line by line. "This has to be fake," she said. "This isn't real. Grandpa left me this house." "He left you a card," I said quietly. He left the house to the one person in this family who actually showed up when it mattered. My mother's voice cracked into something sharp and desperate. You can't do this. This is our family home. It was his home, I said. And he made sure it would never belong to people who let his granddaughter nearly die on a cabin floor while they went boating. My father stepped forward, his voice rising the way it always did when he wanted to control a room. You ungrateful little. Careful, I said. Patricia Coyle already has copies of everything, including Ruth's statement about what she heard through that window. That stopped him mid-sentence. My mother tried a different approach, her voice softening into something almost pleading. Emma, honey, we're family. Families work things out. Families don't leave their daughter on a floor for 6 hours, I said. You worked that out a long time ago. Bailey was still staring at the papers, her hands trembling now, not with anger, but with the sudden, sinking understanding that the ground she'd been standing on had just disappeared beneath her. You have 30 days, I said, standing up, starting today. Nobody said another word as I walked past them, down the porch steps, toward the car I'd parked at the edge of the driveway. 6 months later, I stood on that same porch again, but everything about it felt different. The lake house had a new coat of paint, the color my grandfather always said he'd get around to one day. I'd turned the guest room into an office, and on the wall above the desk, I'd framed his letter, not as a wound, but as proof that someone had believed in me long before I believed in myself. I started a small fund in his name, one that helps young people rebuild their lives after being pushed out of homes that were supposed to love them. The first recipient was a 19-year-old girl from 3 towns over, and when I handed her the check, she asked me why I was doing this. I told her the truth. Because someone did it for me, quietly, patiently, and right on time. My parents call sometimes, usually when they need something. I let it ring. Because the version of me that used to shrink to fit their silence doesn't live in that house anymore. And if you've ever had a family that made you feel like you were the problem instead of the person they should have protected, I want you to know something my grandfather knew long before I did. The truth doesn't need you to shout. It just needs you to survive long enough for it to arrive. If this story hit home for you, there's another one waiting on my channel right now about a daughter who found out the will her family hid from her for a decade, and trust me, you don't want to miss how that one ends.